Welcome to Book Talk. Is government as we know it going the way of the Brontosaurus? Too big, too heavy, too stupid to survive competition from smaller, nimbler rivals? My guest today, the political commentator Adrian Wooldridge, is co-author of The Fourth Revolution, a book arguing that there's a global race to reinvent the state for a world where, with the rise of China and other new industrial powers, economic competition is now tougher than ever before. So, Adrian, if we're now living through a fourth revolution in government, what were the first three?
Well, the first revolution was the rise of the nation state in the 16th and 17th centuries, which basically said that the duty of the state was to provide order, and which got barons under control, which put an end to religious wars within nation states. The second revolution was the rise of an accountable, quasi-democratic government that put an emphasis on freedom. That was in the late 18th and early 19th centuries. And really, that put a constraint on the extent to which the state could interfere in your lives, and it introduced meritocratic government, open examinations into the civil service, for example. The third revolution was the rise of the big welfare state in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. And we also argue in this book that there was a half revolution in the 1970s and 80s, led by Mrs. Thatcher, led by Ronald Reagan, which tried to get the state out of running businesses and tried to reduce the size of the state. And we call it a half revolution because actually the state didn't really shrink that much at all and has recently resumed its growth.
So if we need a fourth revolution now, what's going wrong?
What's going wrong is that government is too big, so that debt has become an almost permanent state. We basically borrow all the time. Keynes said that we should borrow when we have a recession in order to make up for a collapse in private demand. But what we're doing now is borrowing all the time and running almost permanent deficits. So that's going wrong. Government has become too big, too unfocused, and quite often too unaccountable. We don't actually know half the time what government is doing or why.
And how does this relate to democracy? Is the state going awry because people want lots of goodies from it, education, pensions, welfare, roads, whatever, but also want low taxes at the same time? I mean, you point in the book, for example, the example of California, people constantly voting themselves goodies and all simultaneously voting for tax cuts.
Absolutely. Well, California has an initiative process whereby you can vote directly on what you want, and people have used that process to vote absolutely for more spending and lower taxes. And that's a sort of paradigmatic example of what's been happening in democracies in the long term. Since the big state revolution after the Second World War, with the state getting bigger, you've had constantly people voting for more from their governors. You've had politicians offering more, engaged in a bidding war, but a reluctance to pay for that. So we've had permanent deficits, and we've also had a constant reduction in investment in infrastructure. So you see investment in infrastructure as a proportion of GDP, both in the United States and in Europe, relentlessly declining since the 1950s.
There are quite a number of books around at the moment that look on in awe at what's happening in places like particularly China, but also maybe South Korea, various other examples, where an energetic or quite authoritarian state is able to sort of tank through vast infrastructure investments, vast changes to the way society operates, move whole populations around.
Sure.
And there's a kind of implicit worry that, sort of soft, flabby, Western liberal democracies will never be able to match these guys.
Well, I share that worry. I think one of the things that's happened over the last 20 years is that the quality of government in democratic countries has gone down. So the forward march of democracy, which we saw from 1945 all the way to 2000, has begun to go into retreat. At the same time, the quality of government, particularly in China and Singapore, but in many other emerging markets, has gone up. And what the Chinese have done is something very remarkable. They've created a sort of accountable autocracy, in the sense that most autocracies collapse because tyrants, once they've got power, never give it up. They get older, they get madder, and eventually people revolt against them. But what the Chinese have done have created a rotation of elites. So every 10 years, they get rid of one lot of rulers and replace them with a new lot of rulers. And that seems to have worked in the last few rounds. It seems to be peaceable. It seems to be the way the system works. So to have authoritarianism, which also gets rid of old rulers, brings in new ones, is a remarkable new thing. They've also created a system of state capitalism, whereby the state runs the commanding heights of the economy, but doesn't do so in the old-fashioned ways of bureaucrats technocrats running companies, but instead owns shares in companies, allows those companies to compete internally within the Chinese market and externally with the rest of the world. So China has really, really improved its performance rather dramatically at a time when democracies have got softer, flabbier, and more beholden to veto groups which prevent them from taking tough decisions.
Because you do come pretty close to arguing, if you don't actually, maybe you do in some senses outright argue, that democratic states are, for those sort of reasons, at a permanent economic disadvantage. They're not as flexible because they're strung about with groups who don't necessarily want, for example, a high-speed railway through their neighbourhood.
Well, what we argue in this book is that there is a global race to reinvent the state, and that we should not presume that the West is going to win it. We want the West to win it. We want the values of democracy and particularly individual liberty to win this global race. But in order to win it, we have to take the threat or the challenge from China seriously. That's why we're so worried that the quality of democracies has gone down, their ability to make decisions has gone down, and that's why we're so worried that the Chinese seem to be improving their act. There is a global race to see which values will dominate the 21st century. We want the values of liberty, democracy to dominate the 21st century, but they will only do so insofar, I think, as we need to row back on the size of the state, to have it less bloated, to have it more focused on the things that it should be doing rather than trying to do too many things, and to have it become more effective. In other words, if we're going to beat the Chinese, we have to have a better state.
One of the things that interests me about, it's almost a motif in parts of the book, is your description of this campus where the Chinese elite is educated, learns the techniques of government. They all go off and visit Singapore and gape at the wonderfully clean streets and sit at the feet of Lee Kuan Yew, the sort of patriarch of Singapore, and drink of his wisdom. Is that something we should be doing too? Should we be putting a great deal more into our sort of political and civil service elite and inculcating them in different ideas?
Well, you're referring to CELAP, which we start the book with, which is the Chinese Executive Leadership Academy, Pudong, which is just outside Shanghai, and which is an extraordinary institution. It looks a bit like a military operation crossed with Harvard, but all of which is redesigned by Dr. No. So you have enormous desks, you have enormous inkwells, buildings looking like desks, buildings looking like inkwells, buildings looking like the open pages of a book. So it's an extraordinary place to go. But the emphasis there is on training people to run things. It's not like the party school, which is about ideology. It's about how to run the best sewerage system, how to run the best companies, how to run a province. So it's a relentless emphasis on technocracy almost. We do, of course, have civil service colleges here. I think the upper civil service in Britain is very well trained. It's also the case in China. But I think it's also the case in France, for example. But I think where the Chinese have got an advantage is a sense of looking outward at the world. They want to look at the whole world. They want to start from scratch. They are starting from scratch in many of their institutions, and they want to see what works best anywhere, unencumbered by ideology. And why we should be frightened of this is that if you go back to the 1990s, the Chinese were looking at our companies and saying, what can we learn from these companies? And they learned from them, they gutted them, they took out the best lessons, and they're now producing rivals to Western companies, which are getting better all the time. Something like Huawei is one of the world's best companies now. And I think they're doing that with government as well. They're also saying, our government isn't up to scratch. It's been allowed to wither for many centuries. We need to bring it up to date. We need to make it effective. Let's look everywhere. And again, another thing which ought to worry us is, where are they looking? They're looking at Brazil's system of conditional cash transfers, the sort of basis of their welfare state. They're looking at India, which has the most remarkable sort of hospitals. They're looking at France, they're looking at Britain, they look a lot at the Nordic countries. But when it comes to Washington, which was supposed to be at the heart of Western hegemony, the Western democratic project throughout the 20th century, they're not looking there at all. All they see is dysfunction.
Are you saying that Western countries have to maybe become a bit more authoritarian themselves in order to get a state that's nimble enough to address the problems of the future? It seems to, Washington, almost the word that naturally follows these days from Washington is the word gridlock. That there's a sort of self-checkmated system there where it's very difficult to pass a radically different budget or a really controversial law. are we going to have to give all that up and just say this is the price we pay for economic survival?
I love the phrase self-checkmated. I think that's exactly what's going on in Washington. I don't think we need to be authoritarian in the way the Chinese are. I don't think we need to have mandarins directing everything and not accountable to democracy. Democracy is a huge virtue. We need to preserve it. But sometimes you can have, as it were, too much of a good thing, or democracy can become over self-indulgent. And I think what you do need to have is various constraints on the power of people to vote themselves things that don't make sense. Just as it's foolish to vote for lower taxes and higher spending, we need to have some way of preventing people from giving into their lowest instincts. To give you an example, we in the 1990s and 1980s created a central banking system which prevented governments from manipulating, the printing of money in order to win elections. They contracted out that sort of decision to central bankers. I think there's a sense in which we need to contract out some decision making, either to technocrats or at least to wise men and women who can take a longer-term view of things. I'm thinking particularly about the pension crisis, about the entitlement crisis. We're not really funding our pensions fully. Certainly the United States isn't. And I think that's partly because we have a sort of irresponsible tendency to vote for short-term things, not for long-term things. What the Swedish did in the 1990s was to take a look at their pension system, hand over big decisions about their pension system to a group of former politicians or people who weren't, in the trenches, people who'd been politicians, and say, can you design a system which will be sustainable in the long term? And they came up with a system which raised the retirement age, which linked the retirement age to the aging of the population,